So you guys that are, everybody that's just shown up, if you gonna have your MacBook out anyway and you want to play along, you can get the code and the PowerPoint at this GitHub repo. But if you do get ResearchKit and just in Xcode, take it, drag it over to where it's missing it in my project, should work just fine. I try to do, and I'll kind of get into it. We can probably get started. Hello and welcome. I like this walk-up song. We did a little fun presentation thing at our work, and we did walk-up songs for everyone. Funny story, you get to learn a lot about somebody from their walk-up song. Some of them I had to pause very quickly, so you wouldn't hear Tupac cursing too much. Okay, cool. So welcome. My name is Igor. You're at 360 IDEV. I neglected to test my Asthma Buddy repo and make sure that all the dependencies are there. So if you are planning on playing along, try to pull down ResearchKit as well and drag it over to your project. But we'll go ahead and get going. So again, my name is Igor. Hello. I'm an iOS developer. I work here at DaVita. If you guys have crossed the bridge downtown, you've seen our logo on the building. DaVita is the biggest single occupant building in Denver. And we're actually building a second building, so that's exciting. I live here in Denver for the last 4 years, from Kansas City and then originally from Ukraine. My wife and I have a new addition to the family, 7-month-old baby girl Alexandra. This is a great picture because we're posing so hard, and she, I think, is not super excited about the photo shoot. Check me out on Twitter and GitHub, and then just for fun, I thought I'd mention I like cycling, kind of on and off, and currently training for a super long 100-mile bike ride later next month. So super excited about that. Cool, so we're in Colorado, and I thought I would do a little story first. So just out of curiosity, who here is from Colorado and a native? So native Colorado, nobody, and that's fun. That's actually pretty typical. A lot of people are transplants. So who is a Colorado transplant? Who lives here? Cool, very nice, very nice. And then visiting, obviously, everybody else. Shows you, it's cool. But welcome. So beautiful mountains. Check them out if you can. If you're staying a little longer this week. Got a couple other mountain pictures. So a lot of people know about the gold rush and how they found gold on Pikes Peak. I think it was in 1859. A bunch of people showed up, said, "I'm gonna get rich mining gold." In reality, some people got rich. Most people ended up sort of spending their money at the taverns back in town, and they ended up kind of mining gold out pretty quickly. So there are a lot of abandoned mining towns throughout Colorado because once the gold's out, they sort of moved on somewhere else. So that's a pretty common and well-known part of Colorado history. But one thing that I've heard recently, and I thought was super interesting, I did a little research for the talk. After that, like mid-1800s, there was a really large number of people that came to Colorado because of tuberculosis. So tuberculosis was a leading killer of Americans in the 1800s and the early 1900s. There was no cure at the time. And so healthcare providers, essentially for people in the cities that weren't feeling well, pretty much across the board diagnosed them with tuberculosis and said, okay, you should move somewhere nice and sunny and where you can relax and breathe clean air. And so a bunch of people showed up. Stats kind of vary, but I found some stuff that says in the 1880s and 1890s, there was 1/3 of the population of Colorado Springs, which was one of the main areas where they had one of these tuberculosis treatment centers, had tuberculosis. And then another estimate, and this is a little bit more far out there, said that 60% of the state's population in 1925 had come to Colorado because of tuberculosis. So yeah, it's not just gold mining town. A lot of people came here because of the nice air and the good weather. Fortunately, and that's kind of the end of my tuberculosis story. Fortunately, they found a cure somewhere around World War II, and having tuberculosis was no longer a thing necessarily for a large population, and so this sort of quieted down. But it is a part of Colorado history. So, with my clever segue, fortunately, we don't live in those times anymore, right? If you want to take care of yourself, and if you have some sort of disorder and you're trying to get treatment for it, you have a lot of better options. So in 2014, HealthKit came out with iOS 8. Air quality is still important though, so we're going to focus on that a little bit in the talk. Okay, so what is HealthKit, right? It's essentially just a data store on your device, right? And you guys might have already played around with it, so this would be kind of an quick overview. It's a data store and a set of services. I'll show lots of examples of how to store data, how to retrieve data, and how to use those services. It is on your device, right? It's encrypted at rest. So that's super important for sort of like legal reasons we'll talk about later. And there is a really strong authorization layer provided by Apple, so you sort of are able to play with the data even though it's more sensitive without too much concern unless you start kind of using it for outside of the device. And then obviously you have apps and devices that connect to it. Today we're going to build an app that connects to HealthKit. So a quick roadmap, right? And this is, I think, Mount Evans. So I kind of threw in a couple pictures of mountains to break it up. So we're going to talk about HealthKit types, and I'll sort of give a quick overview, and then sort of some more concrete examples, some utilities you might use in apps, even if you're not building for HealthKit necessarily. We're going to try to do this Asthma Buddy walkthrough, so I will walk through it. I'll end up kind of doing the thing at the end, so I'll do a little demo. Unfortunately, I didn't link ResearchKit correctly, so you might still have to pull it down separately if you want to play along. And then, just for fun, I thought I would include a HIPAA compliance section. It most likely won't apply to you if you're just kind of messing around with it, but it does certainly apply like a DaVita, where we take data out, outside of the device and use it for treatment, but also sort of store it separately. So the type system, right? So I think it's pretty clever how it was designed, so very kind of generic. One of the complaints about it is that you sort of use the same objects to model very different data, right? So you model inhaler usage and step counts the same way. But I actually think it's pretty good for kind of bringing it down to the basics for developers. So yeah, let's jump right in. And I have a bunch of code on these slides. Hopefully it's not too much. I don't think it will be. So the main object you'll work with is a health store, HK Health Store, right? The things you can do with it are like check if health data is available. On the iPad it wouldn't be. You instantiate the health store and you can do stuff like request authorization to work with, to either share particular types or read particular types. We'll get into the type system here in a sec. I think some of the nomenclature is a little weird. So share actually means to write them to HealthKit. So if you're sharing your like glucose measurement to HealthKit, and then reading is getting it back out. So Apple does recommend using a singleton of these health store objects. So you'll see in my demo project, I kind of wrapped it in an adapter, and I keep one of those guys around. Cool. So then the type system, and this is a object-oriented way of describing exactly what you're saving, right? So we'll talk about types, and then we'll talk about how to use them. So there are a couple types. Characteristic type is the basic one, right? It's things that don't change at all, right? Or normally don't change. So things like date of birth, blood type, gender. Those you can get directly from the health store. You sort of to make sure that they're set, you go into your health app and punch those in, and we'll have some examples of that. We have activity summary type, which is one that's a little, it's the rings on your Apple Watch, right? It's sort of a high-level description of how much you stood and how many calories you burned. And then you have your more concrete, in this particular example, it's a quantity type. So this is the type I would use to describe when or at what point you use your inhaler, right? And there are other things that you would put in that quantity type, which we'll dig into later. But just remember that object type is abstract, and there are concrete implementation of object type that are a little bit more specific to the use case. Cool, so more examples of characteristic type, right? Like I said, these are things that don't change. They're actually pretty simple to query out of HealthKit. But again, these are, you sort of have to, there's a lot of verbose syntax here to describe the thing. What I ended up doing in the sample project is I pulled them out into constants in like a shared file, so I wouldn't have to write this out a bunch of times. So I can just say date of birth type instead of having to spell out this HK object type, characteristic type for identifier. Being familiar, if you're going to do a lot of work with HealthKit, being familiar with these identifiers, I think is pretty important in sort of knowing what's there. You can actually create your own. That was the other, one of the other criticisms was HealthKit is you were sort of stuck with the stuff they gave you. You can attach custom data to the stuff they gave you, and I'll show you how to do that. But you can't do it, you can't like make your own type, unfortunately. And these you can only read, right? Characteristics types are things you can get out, and in the health app, you can save them, but you don't have there's no API for us to like set the date of birth for the user. Cool, so getting into more like interesting things, sample type, right? This is something that changes over time. But there are a lot of different examples that can go into this thing. So there are category types, which are also sample types. So a category type is something that can be enumerated. So sleep is an example. You can be for this category type identifier sleep analysis. The concrete examples of that are you could be in bed, asleep, or awake, right? And there are a few others, but this is kind of the best example. Moving on to this correlation type, that's another kind of interesting one. I think I'm curious to see what else they do with it, but right now it's mostly blood pressure. So when you're correlating your systolic and diastolic blood pressure, you get to use a correlation type, and that basically just ties two measurements together. They're correlated. And then quantity type, which is kind of the most common one, is a thing that has a number. It has a unit, and then it has a number of times that you did it, right? Or a measurement, right? So it could be 1,000 steps, or it could be 10 deciliters per hour of some fluid or whatever. Let's see, there are a couple others. There's a workout type, which I didn't include an example of here, but you would specify I played basketball between 10:30 and 12:30. And then you also have a document type, which is kind of limited. It only supports one format, clinical document architecture, and I think there are a couple other things that it could support. I'll mention that later. Cool, okay, so that's the types, right? So that's a way to describe the thing you're saving in HealthKit. Here's how you actually save it. So you so for example, for this example of HK sample. Sample is a thing that happens over time, and it has a type and it has a quantity. So the first thing you have to do is build a quantity, right? So that's the first line of code there. We build a quantity, we give the quantity units, and these units are kind of interesting. I have a whole slide describing the different types of units and how you can work with them. But in this case, the unit is just count of things, right? And then it's always got a double value. That's a quantity. So we've got 10,000. So we're saying we did 10,000 steps. This is badly named. This is actually step type. And then, we did 10,000 of those. For all your samples, you have to have a start and end date. They're pretty flexible. So in this example, you would want to say like when you started your steps and when you stopped them. But in other situations where it's just a quick measurement, they're okay with you putting the same start and end date. And then here's where we work with our Singleton Health Store again to just go ahead and save it, right? And this will get inserted into HealthKit. Then other apps that have access to the user step count are able to read that data. So it's pretty cool. So HKUnit, right? This is a pretty cool one. So there are quite a few. This is my favorite part of HealthKit is the way that they built this API. So you have your standard units. You have grams and meters and seconds. You can do like more complex stuff with like metric units. If you want to say like kilometer, right? You just say a meter unit with a prefix, right? And you can do this with anything like liters and grams. You can do kilograms, etc. And then you can do time units, right? So hour. And then the really neat part, I think they did a great job here, is complex units, right? So if I wanted to say The only complex unit I can always think of is deciliters per hour. Some of these had a bunch of times, but you say deciliter, right? So liter with the deci prefix, and then you say divided by another unit, divided by hours, and all of a sudden you have this complex deciliter per hour unit that you can later save. You can use it to save a sample with a quantity in HealthKit. So then we get into quantities, right? So quantities are the amount of something, and quantities have a unit. So in this case, and this is all in the playground, so if you guys want to play along, even if you're not able to build the ResearchKit part, you can see like 2 grams and 3 meters, that's kind of interesting, and then 5 kilometers, right? But then you get into more interesting things like converting those units, right? So in this example, you can convert, if you ever wanted to know how many feet are in a 5K, you do the 5 kilometer quantity, HKQuantity, and then you say the double value for a different unit, right? And so HealthKit converts that unit for you. And I think having stuff like this built into a framework is super powerful, right? I don't have any anecdotes, but I've heard fun examples of conversions between feet and meters not working quite well, so and causing bugs. So it's kind of nice to offload this to the framework. Also, this: how many stones are in 2 grams? Very small amount. You can check out the playground for the exact answer. Cool. Right, so a couple more. So slightly different from a sample is a workout. And this may be what you guys expected out of this talk. I'm focusing more on the medical side, but you can do quite a bit with workout tracking. So you can say something simple like, hey, I played basketball from start date to end date, and then HealthKit store.save. Or you can do a little bit more complex stuff, like if you want to contribute to your activity rings, you can say, okay, I did this workout cycling, and I have some optional parameters I can pass in. I didn't say anything about events. It could specify events or total energy burn if my app is calculating that, but all I know is the distance, right? So I said 5 kilometers distance, and that'll get added to my activity summary stuff. You can also do metadata here, and we'll get into metadata here in a minute, but you can attach that to workouts as well.
Are all those workouts, the activity types, predefined, or can you extend for your own?
They are. You cannot extend it. Okay. So it's a HKWorkout type or activity type. And this one was a little weird. So when I talked about identifiers, like quantity identifiers, quantity identifiers, you have separate identifiers for all your measurements, right? Like asthma or glucose. Inhaler usage or glucose levels are separate identifiers. With activities, there's only one HKWorkout type, and then you have these activity types, and then when you go into querying that out, you have to use some factory methods to make predicates for you. So I'm not a huge fan of how they moved away from everything being its own identifier.
Is there another type, and is it handled any differently?
Other type of workout, or?
Other.
Oh, other. I'm not sure.
Yes.
Is there? Cool. Good question. Well, I don't have to look it up now. And I'm not sure how it's handled differently, so great question. Yeah, I didn't spend as much time on the workout piece, but it's certainly interesting. I personally am a Strava user, so I don't look at so much of my health stuff for my workouts. I just look at Strava, and that's the only thing that matters in the world. Cool. Okay, so query types. And these I thought were kind of cool, and I've got a couple of examples, but at a high level, these are the types of queries you can do. So you can do anchored object query, which gives you back an anchor, you save it in your set state somewhere, and then you give it back, and you would only get the delta, the new stuff, right after that anchored object. So that's if you want to get the latest steps for the day, right? But you got the steps for yesterday. Correlation query, very similar to correlation identifier. So that one is just if you want to query related, blood pressure readings. So then into more interesting stuff, observer query. That's one that's long running, so you can set it up and you say, I care about these particular types of objects or types, and it will call your app in the background when new data is saved, right? So if you want to update your UI before the user gets back into it, you would use an observer query. Sample query is a very basic one. That's the one that we're going to use later to like get inhaler usage and stuff. But that one is you're literally looking for an HK sample of a particular type. Source query is one you would use to get the different sources of a particular type. So if you have a pedometer and you have your like Apple Watch, they both record steps. You want to have some UI in your app that shows which types are recording steps for you. You would use a source query. And then the last two are kind of cool. So statistics query gives you the ability to say, I care about this type. I care about steps, right? I care about steps, and I want to know the average, min, max, or what's the other one? Sum, right? So total steps you took or average steps you took, right? And that's kind of getting more into being a real serious health framework, right? Like you're able to like show your users interesting things, and you're able to like make decisions based on these aggregations. You don't have to do the aggregations yourself. And then the HK statistics collection query is super cool in that it allows you to specify a time interval. So in addition to doing these aggregations, you can also say, I care about the time interval of 1 day. And you give it a start and end date. So I could say last week, when the last week started and when it ended, and then I say my time interval is 1 day, and the results, and I can say like I want the average steps or the sum of steps. And the result would actually be an array of the different, the aggregation with that time interval. So you would get 7 sums, right? Not doing a great job explaining that, but it's pretty cool for like showing a trend over time. Okay, so here's a sample query. This is what I was talking about earlier with you have a particular type, which is just workout type. All workouts are the same type. And if you want to run a query for it, you use this predicate for workouts, and you specify an activity type. So this HK sample query has, and all the, these are pretty common in all of those queries, is you specify a predicate, which is like your kind of where clause in a SQL statement. You guys are all familiar. You have to specify how many you want. You have to constrain that, and then you can say like how you want to sort it and stuff. So this will give me my the top 100 samples for running. No time range. Cool, and then the last one, and this one, I think is super cool. I've got it in the playground. I didn't grab the output from it here. And actually, the health store doesn't work well in the playground. It requires like some InfoPLS user description stuff. So the playground's really there for like syntax, and so you guys can grab that code and use it if you like. But this is a statistics query, so I specify date components of 1 day, and I say I want my steps. So quantity type of steps type, and I want the cumulative sum. So give me all the steps for last week, or from start date, which was last week. Give me all the steps from last week, or from the start date, cumulative sum, and I want it by day. And I would get like seven values there. Cool. So that's kind of my walkthrough. Here's the things that are missing, right? And there is a longer list. I'm sure you guys could help me add to it. But from my kind of research and some of the POC stuff we did with this a couple months ago, quantity math is the thing that bugs me the most, right? Like if I want to be able to, because I'm able to convert between HK quantities, right? Then the framework knows how long something is, regardless of what unit it's in. There's no reason I shouldn't be able to say one quantity like height in feet plus the inches remainder. There's no reason I shouldn't be able to say that and get a new HK quantity back. But unfortunately, that's not the case. I have to convert it to the double value. I have to do the arithmetic myself, and then I have to create a new unit. And I have an example of that. Mm-hmm.
That sounds like something someone could write an extension for and publish, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Good idea. I realized this last week. I was like, ooh, I could spend time on the PowerPoint, or I could start writing an extension. But I spent time on the PowerPoint. I found pictures of cats. Thank you. data export, right? And this is stuff that like EMR developers complain about, but actually data export maybe is more of a consumer thing. So there's no way to like click a button and say export all my HealthKit data into some cool format like a CDA, right? And there should be, right? Like I use Strava, and just last night I was able to export all my GPX path stuff, and like there's no reason why that wouldn't be the case here, right? But it's a black box. Interoperability with other health systems, to that point, it's more like there's no API necessarily that some other health system that like we work with at DeVito would be able to query HealthKit on your device. So anytime you want to do like sharing of data, you have to like get it from the phone, and you have to do like a synchronization thing. Just kind of a pain. Would be better if you could just get it out. And then HK document sample. So that one's interesting. So I got excited when I saw that. I thought, oh, cool, I'm going to be able to save like images and PDFs and stuff. But actually, no, the only HK document sample that's supported is CDA, which is like a HL7 kind of format in XML, but not like super useful, right? Like there are some more basic documents that I might want to save that have to do with your health that are not supported. Okay, enough of sad kitty cat. So, section 2. Water. So I don't know. I like when I go to talks. I like to sort of come away with something. So that's why I try to do these kind of. Here's a real world example. I spent a couple weeks like writing an app. It's not perfect. There are a couple bugs in it. Certainly this dependency on ResearchKit, but there are a couple other like aggregations that don't work perfectly. Anyway, the code's yours if you want to use it, or if you don't want to use it. The repo's in the deck, or the deck's in the repo. But I provide no warranty, hasn't been QA'd. Use it at your own risk. But what we're going to build is an inhaler usage tracker, right? So hypothetical scenario, kind of tying it back to the air quality in Denver. What if I don't personally use an inhaler, but like if I did use an inhaler and I had some like super clever integration that every time I did it like connected with my app, we'll pretend like the button that I put on the screen is that thing. What if I could record when I used it, put it in HealthKit, potentially add some extra metadata to it? So that's what we're going to build today. So the roadmap, another mountain picture. I forget where that's at. So we're going to do 4 things, and this is kind of the interactive part. Hopefully, maybe you guys got the project compiling, in which case you can do this with me. So we're going to ask the user for access to certain types. So we're going to create the types we want and say, HealthStore, please give us access to these. We're going to read the characteristics, gender, date of birth. Then we're going to share, so share code word for insert, some usage samples into HealthKit, and then we'll include some custom metadata, which is cool, and then I'll show you a couple ways I found to visualize it. Neat. So here's some more configuration stuff that I did for you guys. Linked HealthKit and MapKit, not a problem, just Xcode capabilities tab. ResearchKit was a little bit more. So it has a CocoaPod. We were kind of doing it in a group session, and the CocoaPod wasn't working quite well. So just dragging over the project seemed to work really well for me. Of course, I forgot that I had it locally instead of kind of embedding it into the repo. Again, I apologize. Added HealthKit in Target's Capabilities tab. That gives us an entitlement and does some setup on developer.apple. So that's pretty cool. And then one of the big kind of gotchas also with location as well is you got to have a usage description, right? So you got to say like, why do you want to insert my data and why do you want to read my data? That should say read. And then some basic navigation, right? Just a couple segment controls. One side is profile, like where you do your stuff. The other side is where you visualize. And this is a big button for I just use my inhaler. So hopefully if you got a building, did anybody get a building at all? You did? Cool, nice. You guys can play along. So this part's already done. Wrap HealthKit store in an adapter, right? So super basic. I just wanted to have a thing that I can talk to through the rest of the app that has one of these. Maybe there's a better way to do a singleton. We talked about this for a while at work. I think this works fine. So that's already done, but then step 1. And if you look, there are 4 functions in that adapter. I labeled them each 1, 2, 3, 4. There are comments. Everything is commented out underneath. So if you want to play along one by one, just uncomment the part that's under authorization. What's important here? Yep, and then you can run the app. And what you should see is this authorization sheet that says, here are the things that Asthma Buddy wants to interact with. And so you can certainly turn these off, or you can turn them on. That'd be great. An important note to make here is that, yes, you have to ask for very granular permissions. You can't say, I want to read everything or write everything. And then the other is that your app will never know if the user swiped no, right? And that's important for privacy reasons. So if we did leak the information that user has a certain type of data, but they decline to allow it to be read, then that's by itself a leak of the fact that they might have a particular condition. And then Apple obviously always sides on the side of maintaining your privacy. Cool, so you should see that. So on to step 2, so getting the characteristics. So find bullet 2 and comment it, run the build. So we do the exception handling, that's kind of required. Make sure that handling the errors that come out of grabbing this data, you will get a nil if you don't have those set, where the user said no to those. And then in my case, I'm just passing it back to my completion block and displaying it on the UI. And so if everything works nicely for you there, you should see something like this. If it still says not set, it could be that you don't have it configured in your health app, right? So if you're running this on the simulator, every time I started up a new simulator and ran this, I had to go into the health app and configure my gender and date of birth. You do that under the little profile tab at the top. So now we have demographics, right? There's also name, which I couldn't find how to query out. Maybe somebody else knows. But I know I can set a name in my health app, but I couldn't find a way to get it out, unfortunately. Cool. So to save samples, right? So in this case, we're interested in inhaler usage. We make an HKQuantity sample. And so this is, again, step 3, if you want to uncomment that. We provide a type and a quantity, so a quantity of, and I made a little helper quantity called quantity 1. So it's a type of count, and it's a amount of 1. And then we've got a couple, in this particular case, right, we don't really care about when it started and when it ended. So this is an example of where it's okay to just say start and end date are the same thing. And then you give it to your HealthKit store and save it. And hopefully you got a success. Obviously you have to do some error handling if not. Cool, and not a ton of UI change there, but you do get a button that now works, hopefully. You should get a little printout that says saved inhaler usage. And then as part 2 of this step is doing the metadata. So you can't really do custom quantity samples, right? You can't come up with your own type, and that's a complaint people have of HealthKit. But what you can do is the extensibility model is metadata. So it's just a dictionary. You can do custom keys for the dictionary. So there are a bunch of predefined keys, but then you can make your own. And so in this example, I made a usage location key that's my own. What I'm interested in there is where were you when you used the inhaler? So I've got all that plumbing set up as well. Hopefully that's working okay. On the topic of location, so if you're running it in the simulator, you should have pre-selected a GPX location of Denver. I was running into a lot of this, like you were in San Francisco when I was writing this code initially. Couldn't find it on the map. But yeah, so GPX files are fine. I was trying to get it to do the path to like ride around Denver or something, and couldn't quite get that to work. But so you have one static location. It doesn't look as cool on the map there. It'll just be the same location where you use the inhaler. But if you end up running this on your device, you'll see kind of more of a cluster, and that's kind of what I was going for. So if you do that step and you run the app and you agree to this location services piece, you should see a nice. You will in a second see a nice map, right? But for now, you just see this prompt, and the button still works. Cool. Okay. So last step, we got to get some data for the charts. So we specify the type that we want. So that we want an inhaler usage quantity, no predicate in this case. We'll just give us the top 100, and then you get back your query, and then you get your samples, and hopefully, if everything worked okay, your samples are of HKQuantity type array of HKQuantity samples of type inhaler usage.
So if you don't give it any sort descriptors, is it going to sort by date automatically?
I think it sorts it by when it was added. Yeah, I believe so.
So I assume what you're looking for here is the most recent 100.
Yes. Yep. And yeah, like I said, maybe some bugs in here. I have very little like sample data, right? Every time I spin up a new simulator, or reinstall the app, I threw away my old data. So there may be a nuance there, but I'm pretty sure it sorts it by date added. Cool. Okay, so then into the visualizations, right? I promised visualizations, so I've got two. ResearchKit I thought was pretty cool. I started working with some other third-party library, and it was kind of complicated, and I've worked with other charts before, but I found ResearchKit to be super neat when it comes to these charts. It's pretty limited on what it supports. It supports these line graphs, and it supports pie charts, and then a few others, but I think most of your use cases can be supported by this. I thought that the actual interface builder worked fine. It showed me a little sample chart, which was pretty cool, and then the actual data source model was pretty nice, right? So you just tell it how many points are on your one plot on a particular plot, how many plots are there on this thing, so you can do multi-line plots real nicely. Number of points per plot. This is the value. This is the number of points in a plot. This is the number of plots, and then this is the x-axis labels. That's these little short dates. Right? That's really all you need in a chart library, right? If you're doing some kind of basic stuff. So I encourage you to check out ResearchKit for charts. Another thing it does is this I think the sort of intended purpose of ResearchKit, which is this anonymous population research, right? So like somebody who cares about maybe even inhaler usage across the population, they want to de-identify the usage of it within their test group, and then get some aggregations on top of that. That's something that ResearchKit does, but I won't get into it too much more.
So that control is a HealthKit control?
It is a ResearchKit control.
ResearchKit.
I have the types in here. It is a ORK
line graph chart view?
That's the one. Thank you. Yeah. ResearchKit is open source, so I'm sure you can find a number of things to get into there if you're interested. Repos on GitHub. Cool. Okay. And then the map piece. This API is not my favorite, right? You have to do weird stuff, and every time I touch it, I have to relearn it. But I have some locations, not as compelling as I wanted it to be. I didn't get the drive around Denver thing going, but you have to return a view for the particular annotation, and then the way I did it, and probably not a good design pattern, but I coupled this HKQuantity sample array with, I made an extension, an extension or utilities on Swift in the project that knows how to take an array of quantity samples and check if they have location metadata. And sorry, stop my timer. Check if they have location metadata and make MK annotations out of them. and then you have to add the MK annotations to the map. I couldn't get the refresh to work. Another thing that I could have probably spent another 2 hours on, but when you do add new locations, you end up having, in my app, to restart it. So that's kind of a bummer. But yeah, I did it on the main thread and everything, but for some reason that wasn't quite working, so we'll tinker with that later. Always stuff to do. Cool, okay, let me do a quick demo. We're doing 5 minutes. So here's my adapter. I did some stuff. This is as close as I like to come to live coding, right? Live uncommenting of things. You want to watch me spell? Simulator needs app icon. Did spend time on that. Pick it out, orange. Lots of orange. Cool characteristics got brought in. Neat. My charts are working, and I can save a quick inhaler usage. Got saved with location in HealthKit. That's exciting. But then yeah, there's so the ResearchKit chart got updated, but I happen to know that there's a bug where even though it would have been the same pin here, if it was on a device it would be different. It's still not updating right. So if anybody has any MapKit experience, let me know what I'm doing wrong. Okay, so that concludes our demo. And super fast, and this I thought I would include this part because it's like real world stuff that we have to deal with. But if you're not, there are a couple of specific scenarios that have to happen for this to apply to you. So if you're pretty sure you're not, if this doesn't apply to you, feel free to decide where you're going next. But HIPAA and you, right? So HIPAA is a privacy law that was passed in 1996, so way before your iPhone and Twitter was around. What it essentially says is you must protect PHI at rest and in motion. If this applies to you, and we'll talk about what that means in a sec. You must protect it at all costs. You must minimize the sharing of said PHI to the bare minimum for getting your business done. In 2013, they passed an addition to it that said also business associates, and we'll talk about what that means in a sec, but that basically is anybody that's a vendor of yours, if you're one of the covered entities, must be PHI compliant. And so that's why at Vita, we are a covered entity. We have trouble finding vendors that will work with us because a lot of times vendors want to stay as far away from PHI as possible. Just a fun story. And then you have to have trainings and procedures, and that's why we have to lock our machines when we go home. So super fast, PHI versus CHI. So PHI is anything that's identifiable that could essentially leak that you have any sort of private health information, right? And any of this information that's used by covered entities is considered PHI. So blood test results, MRI scan, appointment at your doctor is PHI, right? Your doctor can't just send you an email saying, hey, you have an appointment, without sort of protecting that information first. CHI is more kind of the stuff we save in HealthKit, with the exception that, pedometer steps and calories, with the exception that, inhaler usage is still consumer health information as long as it stays on your phone, right? So if you're building an app, if you build this Asthma Buddy and then you get some investors and then there's a hospital that wants to work with you to get that information out of HealthKit from your app, then that becomes PHI because it is now information shared with a covered entity. That's kind of the main distinction. That's the important thing to know about saving all this stuff. And if you don't intend it to leave the sandbox, then it's probably fine. But if it is going to leave the sandbox and you have this cool startup around it, then you're going to have to really think about what HIPAA in you means. And then real quick, covered entities versus business associates. Covered entities are people that provide healthcare, so hospitals, dialysis clinics, doctor's office, insurance providers. And these are really the people that were covered from 1996 on. And then business associates got added on recently, and that's anybody else that they use and they can share information with. So email vendor, cloud storage provider, payment platform. More likely than not, you guys might actually be a business associate if you ever encounter HIPAA stuff than a covered entity, unless you work for a hospital or something. And then super quick, so I've worked at a couple of covered entities, and I never really understood why the fuss until I did this research, right? So Department of Health and Human Services is who's gonna crack down on you if you have a breach. First time offender, didn't know, could be as low as $100, right? Subsequent offense within the same year, $1.5 million, right? So this is why the lawyers care so much, and the accountants, of course. Engineers are like, no, really, we don't care. And then obviously, yeah, it goes up from there if you like knew and you didn't correct it. And, these audits aren't super common. Audits aren't super common. It's more if there's a breach. Last slide. So this app stuff, this is like what really matters to us. I'm leaking PHI there. Like pretend this is the lock screen. The fact that I said your pharmacy, your prescription's ready at the pharmacy, that's leaking PHI, because if it was a lock screen that I screenshot, it would not be protected, right? So that's an example. So we have to be careful about push notifications, email, calls, integrations we do with others, encryption. So there are like concrete app constraints that we have to face if you're working in a HIPAA covered environment. That's it. Thank you.
Will that go to a VA agreement?
I don't think they do them, and I've been trying to understand why, but no. I think the way they see it is if the user agrees to share the information with you, then it's out of their control, right? So I think they hide behind that sort of consent authorization piece. That's it for me. Thank you so much. If you're interested in all this stuff or some of it, DaVita Mobile Community of Excellence is hiring iOS developers and DevOps. So check out the careers site. You could work with Alfred. And check me out on Twitter. This is my favorite mountain range. This is Mount Princeton. I think it looks cool. Buena Vista is where this picture's taken. Thank you.